So we've done the unboxing and had a good look at this Trifox X10 frame set, and we're ready now to build it up. So what I'm going to do is take apart this old Yo-Yo R6 frame. It's an older model, so we're going to take the Shimano Ultegra R8000 component set off of this and put it straight onto this, so it should transfer over quite easy. So let's get on with it. Starting with the crankset and bottom bracket, undo the pinch bolts and remove the preload cap. Now this is the right hand side of your frame. Note the front derailleur there. So the bottom bracket cup thread is left handed. Remove the inner bolt and tilt the stopper plate, and the crank arm will just slip off. Soft mallet on the crank axle and the rest of the crankset slips out of the bottom bracket. Use the tool fitting BBR60, and this left side of the frame is a normal right-handed thread. Clean the cup threads with the wire brush, make sure there's no paint, thread locker or metal slithers in the thread. Put some lithium grease on the threads in the bottom bracket shell and on the thread of the cup. Make it an even coating. A cotton bud spreads the grease nicely. Put on the sheath and wind it into the bottom bracket shell. Left hand thread on the chain rule side and right hand thread on the other side. Now personally, I don't like tightening bottom bracket cups up in a bike stand. The frame's flapping around too much. So I turn the frame upside down, seat on, preferably handlebars. Here I've got the steerer in a piece of foam, so it protects the steerer, and then I can get a nice firm purchase and get the bottom bracket cups in nice and firmly. So start with the right hand side first. Remember, it's a left hand thread, so it's like you're undoing it. And it don't have to be super tight. That's just nice. Of course, your left hand side is a normal thread, so like you're doing it up. Clean the bottom bracket axle of any old grease and dirt. And where the bearings sit on the axle, smear some new grease on there. Now while the cranks are off, this is a standard crankset, so it's a 5339. But what I thought I'd do in order to climb the hills a bit easier, just change the 39 to a 36. So I did that while the cranks were off. So now we're ready. Now clean out the splines on the left hand crank and smear some grease on them as well. Screw in the preload cap and get your bearings running just right. Not too tight, not too loose. Insert and snug up both the pinch bolts. The instructions say between 12 to 14 newton meters, so set your torque wrench to 13 newton meters. Usually you can reuse your rear gear inner cable. If not for the rear gear, then for the front. 5mm Allen key and removing the rear derailleur. Front derailleur, remove the cap, undo the anchor bolt and pull out the inner cable. And 4mm Allen key and remove the front derailleur from the hanger. Now take the opportunity to clean up the rear and front derailleurs. If you've been using a wax chain, they'll probably not even need a clean. However, there's one thing you can do regardless, and that's clean the pivot joints with brake cleaner or something like that, and then spray them again with silicone. This will keep their movement nice and smooth. Onto removing the calipers from the old frame, 8mm open ender to undo the hose connector bolt. When you take the hose out of the caliper, oil won't go everywhere, it'll be very slow drips. To temporarily stop the oil flow while you do something else, here's 2 suggestions. Put a very small screw in the end and just wind it in a little bit. Or I'll just show you with the front caliper. Again, undo the connecting bolt, remove the caliper, and then put a plastic bag over the end and just tape it to your front forks. Removing the levers, you'll need to remove the lever clamps too, so this means unravelling your handlebar tape. Next is to take the gear cables and brake hoses off of the levers. And the rear gear inner is in good condition except for the very end, but we'll see if I can use it if it's long enough and okay. If not, you can always cut it shorter and use it for the front gear cable on the new bike, and just put a new long rear gear cable in. Undo the hydraulic lines from the levers, 8mm open ender again. 5mm Allen and levers off the handlebars. Now I could leave these hanging here so that when we rebuild this bike we put the hydraulics straight in, but I don't know what I'm going to do with this frame and I haven't got any spare of these bits in stock, so I'm going to have to cut these off because we need them for the levers, and the same with the ends of the hydraulic calipers. So we'll cut them off and we'll scrap the rest of these hydraulic hoses. And then remove the rear caliper. Last thing I want to nick off this bike is the bottle cages. Now let's put the parts on the Trifox. Now the top housing, grease and smear. Outer race of the top bearing, grease and smear. Grease on the compression ring that faces the bearing race. And put it in place on the bearing. Next is the headset area. Take the handlebars off, which was holding the forks in just for display. Grease on the bearing housings of the frame, and then cotton bud to smear the grease nice and evenly. Now a lot of you viewers ask why lithium grease. Simple reason, it's white. If you've ever partially undone a joint just to see if it needs re-greasing, it's much easier to see if there's dirt or rust in there because the white grease goes off colour. If the grease is still nice and white, you don't have to take the joint apart. And grease the fork crown race and smear that as well. Greasing the inner face of the compression ring, first of all, helps the steerer slip past the compression ring, which enables precise and positive engagement of the bottom and top bearings. And secondly, prevents any creaking between the steerer and the compression ring. And the top cap, also being metal, which presses on the metal compression ring, is also a recipe for creaking. So, grease. And the fork can now just go straight in. That'll do, it's just temporary. I'll do the spacing and everything else later. Over to the brake calipers, and before mounting them, check that the surfaces are flat. This front fork mount has some paint overspray, which is easily removed with a sharp knife. Then a little bit of Loctite on the bolt threads. Put both bolts in, but leave the caliper a little bit loose. We'll align the caliper when we put the wheels in with the rotor. Derailleur's rear hanger, grease the thread. That's a bit too much grease, but better too much than too little, can always wipe off the excess. And a little bit of grease on the derailleur bolt thread. And attach the rear derailleur to the hanger. Front derailleur, again, grease the attachment bolt, attach the front derailleur to the hanger. No need to align the front derailleur yet, we'll do that later on. Now we'll put the levers on the handlebars just in an approximate position. Now at this stage I'm going to put the wheels and the pedals on so that I can at least sit on it, put my feet in the clips and hands on the hoods and get a feel for what it's like. Set it up for me, how it should be, so it's right. And it's nothing worse than cutting cables beforehand and realising you have to change something and your hydraulic line's too short to reach or something like that. So get the geometry right for yourself and then you can do the rest later on. It's just a little bit by little bit. So let's do this geometry bit first. Okay, so we'll take these Aviav wheels from the Olio R12 because I know how they feel and how they perform, and we'll put them on the Trifox. Marking the sit bone points on the Trifox seat and the previous bike that was set up just right for me, and put the geometry copy tool on and note the length. Transfer the tool over to the Trifox and put it exactly on the sit bone point. You can see the centre of the tool is slightly forward, so the seat's got to go down a fraction. Right, it's now the same length and the same height as the previous bike. Chain on, adjust the derailleurs as long as the chain's not rubbing. Don't need all the gears, only one gear. Shoes on and go for a ride on the trainer. My normal top tube length is 56 centimeters that I ride, and that usually gives you a 53-54 seat tube. However, to have a 56 top tube on the Trifox here, the seat tube is only 51.5. Hence I'm giving a bit of a test ride on the trainer to see how it feels, and if it's approximate in the ballpark, then I'll continue on with the build. There's a neat cover on the bottom bracket. Remove that, that way we can get access to help us do the cabling. Now with the cabling comes internal cables, which means rattle, rattle, rattle unless you use some of that foam to stop the rattling. Now here's a handy hint. Go and buy yourself some door seal from the hardware store. This is 5 meters of it for just over $3. And there's 2 times 5 because there's 2 lots. That's 10 meters for just over $3. Way cheaper than the actual stuff that you buy for the bike gear, normally from your bike shops online or wherever. So we'll be using that in this Trifox. So this is the hydraulic line. I've just got one long piece of this foam to go from there all the way to the back. It'll go over the top of the bottom bracket. So that's plenty. Now to get onto the hydraulic cable, spray a bit of silicone spray inside, get it right in there. A fair bit, and some of the outside of the hydraulic hose there, and it will slide in easily. You shouldn't need any foam in your handlebars because the cable's fairly tight in there anyhow. For the rear gear cable, the plastic inner or catheter has got kinks in it, this one, so I'm going to take it out and replace it with a new one. So I'll thread a brand new inner cable in first, pull out the catheter, as you can see, that white plastic piece. You can see the kinks. So here's our new piece. It's blue, not white, and I'll just thread that straight back on over the inner cable. Taking the end cap off, and now we can slide the foam in. This piece of foam only goes to the bottom bracket, so it's only the length of that right hand stay. And finally the foam for the down tube. There's no easy way about this, it does take time. Do it slowly and do it properly. For the front derailleur cable, I'm going to use the old rear gear inner cable. It's in good condition, just the end's a bit kinky, so we'll just cut that off. And we'll thread it through to make sure everything slips nicely. Okay, it's through the other end and it's nice and slippery. Not so important for the front one. For the rear one, definitely has to be nice and slippery. Get it as friction free as you can. This one's fine. It's good. And finally, the foam for the front gear cable. Now for the hydraulic hose to go through the forks, unfortunately, the hole isn't big enough for the hose to go through, neither at the top or at the bottom. So we're going to have to file it out a bit. Silicone spray again, great stuff if you want surfaces to slide against each other. So that took half an hour. There we go. Once the hydro line's through the handlebars, can now put the couplings on. A handy hint, put a bit of grease on the olive, it helps seal the connection. Couplings at the caliper end. Attach the line to the lever body and then put the lever on the handlebar. Fill the hydro lines with mineral oil. Thread through the gear inner wires. And make sure it's all working. I removed the crank and the bottom bracket so I can get access to the area. That way it's easy to thread the rear gear cable, the rear hydraulic line and the front gear cable. All done. Now I can put the bottom bracket and the cranks back on again. Well, almost all done. Just got to do the bar tape and do the head stem height. Chop the steer off, of course. So everything looks hunky-dory. Nice and silent, which is good, which means there's no cable hitting on the frame inside. And of course we've got to go for a test ride. Apart from looking like a dork, half got cycling gear, got my sock, got my pants tucked in my sock. Haven't done that since cycling clips days. Ride's really nice. I am surprised. I thought I'd be stretched out too much with the 120 stem. No, it feels exactly like all the other bikes, which is really good. I've got the seat pushed forward a fair bit, but even so I don't feel like I'm too over the bottom bracket. So I'm looking forward to a long ride tomorrow with the guys with this. Apart from the squeaky brakes, and also couldn't get on the big chainring, I'll just fix that. It's easy to do, you just need to adjust the front derailleur. Other than that, that's it. Everything's fine. So I'll just adjust them, do the steerer next, and then we're ready for the ride tomorrow. I'll go for another ride though, around the block again when I do the steerer, just to make absolutely sure. She might go for 2 rides around the block. So cutting the steer is one of the last things to do, as long as you're absolutely sure you've got the height right. Nice clean square cut. Carefully file the edges inside and out. It's more like a manicure. There you go, look at that, lovely. Bit of acrylic nail polish to seal off the end. I usually do 2 coats of this. And carbon paste on the rest of the steerer and on the inside of the stem. And on the inside of the steerer and on the compression plug, so the compression plug grips the steerer properly without having to over tighten it. All done. Looks a treat, but does it ride like a treat? First up, having to file the top and the bottom internal brake hose holes in the fork. The holes were too small and it wasn't just paint clogging it up, I had to file into some of the carbon fibre. That only took about 10 minutes and the hose fitted through perfectly now. Secondly, the seat post. The clamp curve was too tight or too small and had to be folded a bit to get the seat post into the frame. And since then, with the rides I've been doing, I haven't had the seat post slip once. Thirdly, having to remove some excess paint for the caliper mounts on the front forks. This allows a nice flush fit and maximum contact with the front fork mount. Next, I found that the paintwork chips a little bit easier than a good quality paint job. Not sure why that is. It could be that the paint's not quite sticking well enough to the carbon fibre frame itself. And then there was this bolt here on the seat post clamp. Couldn't figure out what a creaking was for the first couple of rides, but grabbing the seat with my hands and giving it a good twist, I heard the creaking, and it was definitely that rear bolt. So took the bolt out, put a washer on and a bit of grease on the bolt head itself, reinserted it, tightened up, and it's been fine since. Lastly, and this would be considered a design flaw, when your cycling shoe is at about 9 o'clock, the heel of the shoe hits the gear outer. So instead of the gear cable coming out of the stay at the side, it'd be nice to have it come out at the back, like most carbon bikes. And the weight of the complete bike, including pedals, GoPro mount and a cheapy, heavy $8.50 seat, which happens to fit my bum just right, is 8.55 kilogram. We all have to wear masks here. But Russell's got a trendy one. Look at that bike cycling thing. No, don't look. Biscuits or maybe. So by the time you're watching this video, I've probably done at least 1,000 kilometres now on this Trifox X10 and done all sorts of road work, including some off-road gravel work with potholes. Now I've used two sets of wheels, both the Aviav 50mm section rims and these Windspace Hypers, which are 65mm. So I tried two sets of wheels as well. And the tyres are 28C Vittoria Rubino Graphene 2s. So what is it like to ride? How does it feel? How does it perform? First of all, it is solid and stiff. Yes, absolutely, no question about it. When you put your power down, whether you're dancing up a hill or you're giving it oomph in the sprint, it certainly delivers there. Now when descending down hills at speed, it tracks really well, so it doesn't understeer or oversteer. It's very predictable, very nice. Now that's usually to do with the head angle and the fork rate, and yet it still retains a nimble feel. So if you need to dart here and there around objects or other riders, then that will be no problem at all. So just did a climb, they come, and it's fine, it's really good. Feels like the Canyon Air Road, except with wide bars, which is even better. So I should put wide bars on the Canyon Air Road, I think. But it's comfy, smooth. You can settle down into a nice rhythm, so good for uphill. On the way back here, we've got to go downhill, so it'll be fast downhill. We'll try it out, see how stable it is. But so far so good, so nice. So is this a true aerodynamic frame set? Well, I've not seen any statistics yet on testing in wind tunnels of this frame set to see how aerodynamic it is, and yet it still feels fast, I can tell you, when you're riding it. Now, a true aerodynamic bike, the whole package, would not have your cables exposed here. Would usually be fully integrated through your handlebars, through your stem, and down through your frame. This one has your cables exposed here, so it's like semi-integrated, semi-aero. All your cables integrated into your frame and just exposed at the front. But that can be a plus because you can therefore take your handlebars off, get access to your headset if you need to re-grease it or whatever, and your cables here you can get access to change anything or service anything. So there's sort of pluses and minuses there. Now it does tend to lean toward being more of a racy rather than an all-rounder frame set due to a smaller front end, a smaller head tube here, a bit like the Canyon Aero rather than a taller headset. And that means being a smaller front end, a lower front end, and also your seat post will be further out of the frame as well. So that gives it more of a lower end like that, rather than like that, a more upright position. Because of that more racy aerodynamic position, it may not be as comfortable for you, especially if you're aging a little bit. And for me, being middle-aged, well, I can handle it, it's okay, but I certainly wouldn't take it out on a nice, slow, comfy Sunday ride. It's a bit like driving a Porsche around the city when you can't, it wants to go and you're not using it to its full potential. So would I recommend this Trifox X10 frame set to you? Most certainly if you're after more of a racy feel, more of a race-ready bike. And its cheaper price point makes it even more accessible, especially for those on a budget and if you want to get into racing. Absolutely recommend it. Well, I'm definitely going to keep on riding this bike. I like it.
Go and ride over that. Get a camouflage bike. It's Stephen's new toy. Surprisingly comfortable on a rougher surface. I'm on gravel at the moment.